Welcome back, folks. It is Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode number 155 of this wonderful Friday. Welcome again, wherever you are in the world. Please tell us where you are in the world in the comments as we go ahead in this episode. Unfortunately, we were going to have a guest, but there may have been a little bit of technical problems along the way. So we're going to kind of riff it on our own here, which is the beauty of live streaming. Help us out. Stick around. Yes, this is indeed the show about the business of culture and the culture of business. Two Chaps, Many Cultures. How are you today, pal?
I am splendid. Happy Friday, everybody. Shabbat Shalom for those of you who celebrate in the Jewish tradition. And this is the episode 155, and I'm glancing down at the reason for episode 155. We proudly announced a guest for you today, and it just so appears that our guest is somehow incapacitated. We're not going to give away what exactly is going on. Suffice it to say, she can't be with us right now, and maybe something will change throughout the episode and she will appear, and we don't know this yet. So this, as Brett says, this is the beauty of live streaming. You announce it, you put a timestamp and a date on it. You even create a beautiful logo or an intro slide for it, and then life gets in the way. So not to worry, though. Since it's Friday, we're not going to keep you long anyway, and we're going to talk about the topic that we had in mind to begin with. The reason why we are planning with this guest, and we are still planning to have this guest once those issues are resolved. And hey, hello.
Bonjour,
bonjour, bonsoir, I guess.
Bonsoir, yeah.
Bonsoir. Bon après-midi. I don't know. I guess it's bonsoir at this time.
Yeah. Or namaste, that kind of stuff, as it
is. Beautiful. Our guest today is a published author who has been around for quite a while, and who's done our work, who's been working and teaching across cultures. And she spent several years in Japan, and even though she is from North America, her Japanese, so we are told, is, if not impeccable, it is at least fluent, and we suppose it's going to be great without us really knowing. But the reason why we asked her to be a part of the Two Chaps family is she recently published a book called The Business of We. And you see here, her name is Laura Kriska. The Business of We. And I was like, well, what's the business of we? I mean, of course we do business. I can't do business by myself. I mean, that's kind of so there's got to be a we, right? And you might think people intuitively know that there is multiple parties involved in business. And I remember my dad telling me back in the day that business is only then a business if every party involved reaps some sort of benefit or walks away with some sort of gain, whether it's a monetary or, I don't know, whatever type of gain, right? So business is only business if there is a we. And what Laura is hinting at is that we too often look at us versus them instead of having the we in mind at all. And while I'm rambling, look who's showing up in the green room. There she is, joining us. I'm glad we got all the issues that we are not talking about. We got all those issues resolved, and you were able to join us. Thanks.
That was good riffing. Very good. I apologize. Thank goodness I have an 18-year-old in my house who just solved my problems. Let's hear it for 18-year-olds.
Teenagers, yes. What would the world be without them?
They wouldn't be here, I guarantee you.
Fantastic.
Laura, we only briefly touched upon it that you recently came out with a book called, well, I'm going to hold it in the camera so people can hold it, The Business of We. Oh, you have a copy too.
Brett, you don't have a copy?
I don't have a copy.
Here, have mine.
I'm just unloved and unappreciated over here in my little corner of Chicago. That's fine. I had not had a chance to get my copy yet. I'm sorry about that, but yes.
Let's blame the weather.
I want to feel included. Of course, that's what we're talking about, right?
Well, see, us, Laura and I, we thought us versus you. You don't need the book, right? Nah. Laura, welcome to the program, Two Chaps, Many Cultures. Those of you who are watching this for the first or maybe the, I don't know, umpteenth time, look at the scroll bar underneath our beautiful faces. We want to know where in the world you are, where you're joining us from today, because here it's not us versus them. This is the show of we, and we would like to know where we can call you sisters and brothers and everything in between, wherever in the world you are. So put that in the comments below, whatever tool you're using to watch this. Inquiring, inquisitive minds would like to know where you are. Laura, where are you today?
I am in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn.
Yes.
All right.
Where there's snow on the ground, but it's around 40 degrees. So everybody's very happy that it's all the way up to about 40.
So it's going to be slushy soon.
Yeah.
And in our intro, we briefly made an introduction, but it was obviously not good enough because the introduction should come from you directly. But I mentioned briefly that you spent significant time around the globe in Japan, and I've been told, a little birdie told me that your Japanese is quite all right. Would you say so as well?
まあ、日本語、子供のからちょっと勉強できましたけども、錆びつきましたよ。
I think I had one of those and the wheels fell off.
No, it's actually not very good. So I was born in Japan. I was born in Japan. My parents were missionaries in Tokyo, and they were just randomly sent to Japan. So that's where my life started. I was only 2 years old when we left Japan, and I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. In a very homogeneous community, and I didn't really have a chance to learn Japanese until college. Now, I've spoken a little bit. My parents spoke Japanese. My dad in particular has an amazing memory for Japanese language. So we learned little phrases growing up, but when I first learned it, it was in college, and I spent my junior year in Tokyo at Waseda University. So that's when I really started to study. But my first job after college was working in Honda Motor Company's Tokyo headquarters. I was the only and first American woman to work there among thousands of Japanese colleagues. And so that's where my language really started to get better, because, you know, the phone would be ringing and I would be the only one to answer it. So I would have to, you know, pick up the phone, "Hondake ken de gozaimasu, shoujo omachi kudasaimasu," you know, like phrases and practice that is completely different. I know each of you have had experiences where you probably had to really step up with your language because you just, it wasn't school, it's life, it's work.
Yeah. I think that this is a story that all of us share, that we get the privilege to learn a foreign language and then actually execute on the learnings in a real life environment. And it doesn't matter whether it's Japanese or, in Brett's case, Polish. Yeah. In my case, it's English. Believe it or not. I mean, I sound like a native speaker, don't I? But it is my second language. And if I'm very tired and maybe even a little bit inebriated, my German accent will come out very strongly, and then you will know that it is not my first language. So yes, I do relate to that pressure.
That's funny, because I was going to say, when I'm inebriated, my Japanese gets better.
Yeah. Well, my Polish certainly does.
It depends on what I drink.
I think my Japanese gets better. Maybe that's the key factor.
Yeah, that's the drunk fallacy. I want to acknowledge a few people that are telling us where they are right now. So we already had Miton in Paris, in beautiful Paris, and we have I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Birgitte, I believe. My Danish is really rusty, if not non-existent at all. So Birgitte here in Atlanta, where I'm at. So welcome. Thanks for joining in.
Hi, everyone.
Laura, what prompted you to write about the business of we? Or, I mean, the premise is that it's often about the us versus them. That is often the bipolar, not very helpful premise of international business, where a group finds itself juxtaposed against another group, and we see ourselves as separate tribes that have little in common, except for maybe the desire to do business. So it's this us versus them mentality that sometimes still holds on strong to some people's mindsets. But was that the premise of the book, or how did that come about?
Mm-hmm. The book came about out of my work with Japanese businesses. I've spent most of my career working with large, huge Japanese companies around the world and helping them bridge the gap between Japanese culture and the other culture. Maybe US, it might be German culture, wherever they happen to be. I'll say it mostly was American and Japan. So that was the us versus them. And then I expanded. But when I worked with Japanese and American people, I saw predictable, inevitable culture gaps. I think culture gaps are inevitable and predictable. They shouldn't be a surprise that they exist. One of the central messages of my book is that cultural data matters. I know the two of you agree with this. You have built a show on this premise, and I think your show is wonderful, by the way. I think the episodes and the topics you're examining are things that everybody needs in our daily life. 50 years ago, this was the kind of stuff that diplomats needed to understand. But we're all diplomats to a degree, living in the diverse, global, connected communities that we're in now. So when I was working with Japan versus America, I was working very hard to address these predictable gaps. And I came up with tools, exercises, language. And I started to see that when I worked in other countries with Japanese and Mexican culture, or Japanese and Brazilian culture, I realized, these tools can be applied to many groups. And then I had my own kind of awakening that the tools could be applied to any us versus them dynamic, no matter where it is, no matter what the basis of it is. And so I changed some of the language of the tools. And this is why my language tends to be very broad. I talk about we building, I talk about us versus them. This could be applied to many, many dynamics because I want people to be involved in this experience of examining themselves, picking us versus them dynamics that are relevant to their life. A company can tell you, this is important or that's important, but I find the most effective progress takes place when individuals and leaders are the ones motivated to close a specific gap.
What were some of the biggest gaps you recognize? First of all, with the U.S.-Japanese context, where it's I guess rather easy to fall into the us versus them trap. It's the Western, quote unquote, Western world plotted against East or Southeast Asia. The two cultural clusters that see each other as quite foreign to or from each other. What were some of the most pronounced gaps that stood out for you in the beginning?
Well, working with Japanese and American people, of course, the language gap, the geographical gap, ethnicity, race, history, religion, there are multiple gaps that exist. But the fundamental gap that everybody can relate to who works is occupational gaps. I mean, have you worked in an organization that didn't have this? Sales versus marketing, front office versus back office, manufacturing versus engineering. I mean, they're everywhere, blue collar versus white collar. And sometimes those are appropriate. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's causing problems, but everybody can relate to these occupational us versus them gaps. But when I started working with Japanese colleagues, I saw that it had to do primarily with language. A lot of Japanese colleagues that I've worked with, and I have worked with thousands of Japanese colleagues, and I have found them almost to a person hardworking, intelligent, dedicated, really wanting to do the right things, but having a different language than people that they were working with was this big barrier. But when I started working with them, I realized it was the perception of the barrier. Many Japanese people, for example, most Japanese people start studying English in middle school, junior high school. So by the time they are out in the world and working, they have years and years of language experience. A lot of that is in reading and writing, so they may not be as comfortable speaking it. But what I came to understand is that they kind of were hiding behind this language difference. And what really prevented them from interacting with the local communities that they were in was this fear of doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And
because that would be basically a wrongdoing would also be a ding on the honor, right? It's a face-saving culture. There would be, one would lose their face or their reputation in connection to the group that one belongs to, right?
Yeah. Can I tell you a story about a real group that solved this problem in about
let's hear it.
an hour? Okay, this is one of my all-time favorite stories. It's a true story about an American car racing team. And the story is in the book, and it's about a IndyCar race team in Ohio. And they made an arrangement actually with Honda for a 1-year research team. And there would be about 10 American guys in Ohio, and from Japan, a group of 10 engineers were coming to Ohio to work for 1 year. The race team in Ohio was responsible for the car, the chassis. These guys that I worked with this team, I was the translator, they love cars. They knew everything there was to know about cars. I affectionately referred to these men as the gearheads. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this project started in January. The Japanese team, they were engineers, all engineers. They were bringing about many spec engines. And these engines would be brought. And so you put the engine with the car, the engineers with the gearheads, and you make a team and you try to make a super fast race car and you test it.
Yeah, it doesn't always work like that, does it?
This was the plan.
Let me guess. Was this Penske or?
It was Bobby Rahal.
Oh, okay. Mm.
And so when I started in this job, I had not been in racing before, and I visited the garage for the first time, and I saw these big, loud American men talking English very fast. And I had worked in Japan, and I worked with engineers, and I, worked with colleagues like the ones that would be coming. And I was like thinking, how is this going to work? I was worried about communication. My job was a translator, but I wouldn't be able to be everywhere at all times. So I made a proposal to Bobby Rahal, and I said, I want to teach the gearheads some Japanese. And my only goal was that the gearheads all have the skill to introduce themselves on the day that the Japanese team arrived. Mm-hmm. We spent a month or so in preparation, very simple, just basic introductions. And the day the Japanese team arrived, they come to the office, the gearheads say their introduction, Boku wa desu desu, dozo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. It's
with a broad American accent. I could understand that.
But it was amazing. The Japanese engineers, who many of them had never been outside of Japan before, they're in central Ohio. It's after a long flight, and they're looking at these enormous, American men speaking in Japanese. And their mouths are just like, what? Just can't believe it. And I could sense this was meaningful. But the last guy on the gearhead team was a young guy named Joe. He just languages like couldn't keep the language in his head. He had one phrase. We spent a month and he had one phrase. And this was his default phrase. So here it is, about 6 o'clock at night. Joe is the last one. He steps up and he says his default phrase, which is "Ohayo gozaimasu," good morning. Mm-hmm. And everyone starts to laugh. Everyone, the Japanese are laughing. Joe is laughing, the gearheads, because he said good morning at 6 o'clock at night. But that moment, when I look back on it, I realized that was a critical we-building moment. where these two groups of men, us and them, they looked different, they sounded different, their backgrounds were different, there were predictable and inevitable differences. But in that one moment, they shared this laughter. They all understood it. It was this golden we building moment that then impacted the rest of their year. And they had a level of comfort from that first meeting that I've seen people take weeks or even months to achieve. And it happened because the gearheads did this one thing, this we building action to reach out, even though it was the Japanese team who were the visitors. Generally, I think the visitors, that they're the ones who should adjust. But the gearheads were in what I call the home team culture, right? There's a home team in that environment. That home team was middle-aged white men, where it is a lot in corporate America. And so as the home team, they took on the task to take this relatively simple gesture, and it impacted the rest of their work assignment. And years later, Bobby Rahaal's team won the Indy 500 using a Honda engine. And they just did it in August as well, with Takuma Sato as the driver.
Now, my suspicion, even though I wasn't there, but my suspicion is that what was the Wii magic, the golden Wii moment there, is that the American gearhead, knowing that his memorized phrase may have not been appropriate in the moment, but this is all he had, and he had the vulnerability to say it in spite of the limitation, and probably his fellow gearheads had mastered a little bit more, and the laughter may have reminded him, oh, okay, I may have said something that wasn't really fitting the situation, but hey, we're in this together, and since everybody's laughing, I probably didn't make such a big fool of myself as I thought, right? So it's this admitting or owning up to one's shortcomings and not being afraid to let those that we want to create the we with, let them know, hey, there are things I don't know yet, and still I want to play, right?
I agree. That vulnerability is essential to we building, and creating we building moments. You can't always guarantee it will be a we building moment, but you can foster it by creating situations that lead to these kind of opportunities.
The subtitle of your book, and I'm gonna hold it in the camera so actually people can see what I'm talking about. It says here, the proven 3-step process for closing the gap between us and them. So 3 steps and proven. That's a very American subtitle to a book. Americans need quick, easy takeaways. I'm not stereotyping at all. No, I'm not. But what is that 3-step process? You make a bold promise in big letters on the cover. So let's hear it. What's the 3-step process?
Yay, America!
Yay!
It's so hard to be humble and sell books. It really is. It's just awful. I don't like all that. Look at this, but it's part of it. So I do stand behind the three steps, and I do say I will explain them. They are simple steps, but it's not simple to bridge a gap. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes vulnerability. So here are the 3 simple steps. Number 1, foster awareness. This is something your show is doing every time you do a show. You're helping to foster awareness of cultural differences. People often think of cultural differences related to countries, right? Germany, Australia, the United States. That's a good example of cultural differences, but that's not even close to the only type of cultural differences that exist. So fostering the awareness that culture and cultural identity is related to any aspect of a person's identity. Your gender identity, your socioeconomic class, your race, your ethnicity, your religion. The list is kind of endless. I have a kind of identity cloud in the book that kind of talks about the main categories that exist for most people, but it's not a job of somebody else to tell another person what their cultural identity is. That's something each of us can identify for ourselves, and it's something that changes throughout our lives, throughout the week, however we operate. So fostering awareness, that's number one. So people who like you guys, people who check into this show, that's kind of an easy step because most of us who are in this work understand it. Mm-hmm. Any questions?
No, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, we accept that label of being fosterers of awareness. Yes.
I think the world needs a lot of us. I think the more of us, the better. The roles that we offer and the fostering of this awareness is something that I think used to be marginalized. It used to be for diplomats and a very narrow portion of society, and it needs to be for everyone.
And I think that the trap that a lot of us in our industry fall into, and I'm only projecting from my own experience onto a group of people, and I'm just proclaiming it. Contradict me if you think I'm wrong. That if you work in the cross-cultural field long enough, at some point you start thinking, well, we've all heard this story before. The awareness is out there, has been out there for years. So what we're sharing here should not be news to anyone anymore. And that's when some of us get to the point where we stop being people fostering the awareness because we falsely assume that people have already become aware. And that's I think that's a false presumption. Just because we deal with it every day doesn't mean that the rest of the world does it the same way. And that's why we decided, Brett and I, to do this every day, just to sing the song, and hopefully people will sing with us. Right?
As I said, I think the work you're doing is really important, and I think these shows really highlight important topics that resonate far beyond the kind of narrow cross-cultural world. Your show is for everybody, in my opinion.
Thank you. So step two.
Step two. Keep me on track. Step two.
Yeah.
Step two, I think, is really the second most important. Step two, because the fostering awareness, for most people that comes relatively easy. Step two is an us versus them self-assessment. It's a specific practical tool. It's 10 questions, 10 yes or no questions. And these questions are meant to be asked to yourself about a specific culture, a target culture, if you will. And each person can decide or should decide what that target culture is going to be. This mechanism is to help people look inward. I think this is what's been missing, especially in the United States, yes. Especially when we're talking about racial diversity and racial identity. There's a lot of policy, law, external things, but part of the problem, part of the reason the United States has not achieved equity, in my opinion, is that over 50 years have passed since the civil rights legislation took place, yet so many of the people charged with making decisions about hiring, promotion, diversity and inclusion are people like me, middle-aged white people who live a very homogeneous life. So if people living a homogeneous life are making decisions about diversity initiatives, they have really no business doing that. Then they really should look inward and try to understand, why do I have such a homogeneous life? And so these questions are meant to encourage some self-reflection. When you take the self-assessment, you get a score from 0 to 10. The higher the score, the better. This score is much like stepping on a scale if you wanted to, lose weight or, measure your health. And similarly to measuring your health, your weight is not the only measurement that matters, right? So this.
Thanks for saying that. I hope my wife was listening. Yes.
Well, other things, blood pressure, all these things. But the us versus them assessment is not meant to be a singular data point, but it is a data point. And it's a kind of data point that is, it's available to anybody. They can go to my website, download it for free. You can use it repeatedly and often, but it's a data point that I think has been missing from the diversity and inclusion conversation in the United States. Looking inward, this is essential. And then the self-assessment, these yes or no questions, actually provide the step 3, which is the gap closing action plan. Right. Any no answers on the self-assessment can become an action item for a person who is genuinely interested in narrowing a specific culture gap.
So the action plan, how do you develop that? Do you develop that by yourself based on the self-assessment, or would it be smarter to include somebody with a little bit more facilitation experience to do that?
That's a great question. I think when you're an individual, it's easy to start off doing some actions on your own. I divide actions into 3 categories: safe actions, challenging actions, and radical actions. Safe actions are perfect for now when we are working at home, when we cannot engage in a lot of face-to-face interaction. Safe actions are things that require no vulnerability, no risk. You do it in private. So they're things like reading a book, watching a documentary, listening to a podcast, watching an excellent YouTube live with 2 chaps, these kinds of things. And these are the starting points. In my book, I talk about the fact that safe actions can be done today. If I go back to my example of race in America and middle-aged white people, I know so many middle-aged white people, just like me, who grew up kind of colorblind, right? We grew up in an era where we didn't learn how to talk about race. And now they've reached a point in their lives when they realize, oh, that's part of the problem. I need to talk about race. But so many of them are fearful. They're like, oh, I'm walking on eggshells. I don't know what to do or say. Yep. Okay, fair enough. Then take action to learn. Read, Let's Talk About, You Want to Talk About Race by 𝙦𝙦 or White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, or the 1619 Project podcast. I mean, there's so many wonderful resources. And if people start consuming this data alone by themselves, they are going to prepare themselves to feel more comfortable, more educated, and then be able to move into the challenging category. Yep. Challenging category means face-to-face. Challenging means somebody might say, no, I don't want to have lunch with you. Or, I don't want to be having a conversation, or you're not welcome. It might happen. It probably will happen. If you're really engaged in the work, for example, as a white person who's trying to understand and become more educated and trying to establish a true multicultural, multiracial coalition in our country, you're going to mess up sometimes. It requires some vulnerability. And then you got to be prepared to apologize, forgive yourself, do what you need to do to repair any damage you've caused, and keep moving. Without that, the trajectory of change, I think, is so limited. And then we have the final category, which is radical. Radical is committing yourself to being in a group of some of that culture on an ongoing basis, where you are the minority person, where everyone around you. So when I went to work in Tokyo, that was a radical action. I was, one American woman with lots of Japanese colleagues. So these
cold water, literal, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Now, I do want to address the fact that if we're going to reach out, or if our part of our action plan is to engage with those who are different, that would be the them versus the us, right? In the old thinking, that there might be some pushback, right? And yeah, I know Brett and I, we've had our examples of that. I'm sure, Laura, it was similar for you, that especially as we're talking about the issue of inequality as it connects to ethnicity and race, that sometimes the counterparts that we want to reach out to are tired of that conversation because they've had it all their lives. And just because we just woke up to the fact that there might be something we need to work on, that doesn't mean the other side is ready to engage at the same level, right? Do your own work is what our friends in the African American world keep telling us. Stop asking us to explain it to you. Go start somewhere. You mentioned a couple of great books, and I want to throw this one in here as well. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. If people do your own work.
Well, yeah, I love your those three levels because obviously there is the comfortable, and we can do it on our own, but not many people, even doing it on their own is confronting, right? It is something they just don't want to address, right? And then, so in terms of then having difficult conversations with friends, families, and things like this, I mean, we would love to bring them to what I always say it's the freedom of not having these biases, put you behind in your social life and your professional life and that kind of stuff. It is just a freedom to me. It's an amazing freedom that I've discovered in my life. And I think then the really challenging, the really confronting radical stuff is then putting yourself into very difficult situations that cause you to confront your own biases in a real and tangible way. And we're never saying this is easy. For those out there that are saying, this, we've done it and it's easy, just come to it. It's, the water's fine. It's not. It's cold and it's icy, or it's hot and boiling. Either way of the spectrum. And I want to thank you. You've said it so many times, Laura, and we want to affirm that you've been very generous in your promotion of what we do. But we're really just doing and putting out, like you, content that really kind of hopefully enriches, informs, and educates people to bring them to this, understanding that we're always here to talk. We're always here to offer any type of, and we're also here to learn. Christian and I say this all the time. Challenge us. Put it in the comments. Make sure that you tell us, are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? We want to know, right? Maybe Christian's easier to take that criticism than I am because I come from a different culture. He doesn't take it personally. Maybe I do, but anyway, this is an important conversation. I want to thank you again for coming on. It's been fantastic, and I'm going to go and get the book. I will. I promise. Did you do? There's an audio version of it, right? Did you do the recording?
No, they didn't want me.
Okay.
The publisher. No.
You got James Earl Jones or something like that? Hello.
The publisher said we're hiring a professional, and I really didn't have much to say about it. But then I did get to have some input, and it's very odd to try to choose a voice to read a book that you've written. I spent easily 2 years. I mean, I had the idea for this book 10 years ago. And I spent 2 years, by myself at a small desk in a writing center in Brooklyn, just, working away. And then to pick someone's, their voice from a little clip. But I'm really happy with the person they selected. She has it's like, I just never paid attention to things like voice and sound and timbre as much as I did for that.
So it's not Samuel L. Jackson. They picked the female voice. Okay.
Andy Dufresne.
I want to acknowledge all our audience members are potential future guests, but hey, if Christina is giving us here the German Filipino American hello, well, you put yourself on the list, Christina. Hello.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great.
Excellent. So we're going to put the link to the book in the chat box below. So whether you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube or on LinkedIn, you'll find a link. It's not an affiliate link. It will be an Amazon link. Yes, I know we're not making Jeff Bezos any richer. That's not our intention, but it is the easiest way to find it. If you choose to buy it elsewhere, please be our guest. Do it. And if you don't live in the US and you want to buy it at the whatever shop.uk or .de or .jp, you're smart enough how to spell this, right? You see the name of the author, you see the title of the book. Can't be that hard. It's Friday. I know. You got this, people. You got this.
Right.
Get the book.
And I wanted to say I am going to be doing some free webinars in the next couple weeks talking about we building. One of the events, one aspect right now, are we okay on time? I don't want to keep taking over your time.
We got another 30 seconds.
Oh, well, making virtual events, shared experiences for your organization. I've been doing this more and more with companies. You can do it for very cheaply using technology. It's a great thing to do. That we building moment or that we building shared experience can be really valuable now when we're still working from home. People are seeking connection. So if they to follow me on LinkedIn.
How do people find that webinar? How do they sign up
LinkedIn is
for this?
probably the best way. Look, I'm on all the social platforms, Laura Kriska, but LinkedIn is where I'll probably be posting more about that.
Excellent. Awesome.
Right.
So people, you heard it. Connect with Laura on LinkedIn. Sure, the other socials matter too, but connect with her on LinkedIn. That's where the magic happens. And learn about the We Building webinars. I'm going to sign up. This sounds good. Awesome.
Please join.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks for, I don't know your 18-year-old's name, but on behalf of the entire world that is watching now, thank you to your 18-year-old for resolving the issues.
That's right.
And
I was sweating it out. I was just like,
hey, we made it work. That's all that matters. Thank you very much, Laura. Thanks, Brett. Happy weekend to all of you. However you want to enjoy the last weekend of February. And remember, in the US and Canada, this might be African American History Month, but African Americans have histories and her stories and stories throughout the year. So whether this is the last weekend of that month, shouldn't be stopping to learn about this. All right.
That's right.
Have a wonderful weekend, y'all.
take care.
Thanks, Laura. Great to see you. Have a great weekend.
Christian.
Bye-bye.